Hey, and welcome to Lecture 17 on Hebrew poetry. Just so you know, when I was in high school English, me and poetry did not get along so well. So, as I explain about poetry over the course of this lecture, I do understand some of what's going on in Hebrew poetry, but I will be sticking to my notes probably a little closer even than normal. Poetry and me, so together. All right. Um, You should know that in the Bible, poetry is one of the most important genres because a whole one third of the Old Testament is written as poetry. That is a lot. One third of the Old Testament written as poetry. It's most often seen, obviously, in books like the Psalms, but other books that we'll be discussing later, such as Job and Ecclesiastes, are also poetic in nature. Apart from these direct mentions, poetry can also be seen throughout the entirety of the scriptures, Old Testament and even in the New Testament as well. So, for example, the Song of the Sea in Exodus chapter 15, the Song of Deborah in Judges 12 or Judges 5. These are poetry in the midst of prose. As we approach this topic, perhaps it's just good to bluntly ask, what is biblical poetry? In the most basic sense, poetry is a form of oral, written communication with highly structured brief sentences and vivid, evocative words. Poetry is often contrasted with prose. Prose has its own structures and may also use brief sentences and evocative words, but poetry uses them to a much greater degree. So we should not view poetry and prose as complete opposites, but maybe as ends on a continuum. In general, the more structurally compact, emotionally intense, and metaphorically worded a composition is, the closer it approaches the poetry end of the spectrum. By the same token, the more discursive, abstract, and prosaic the composition, the closer it comes to the prose aspect. As you go to read the Psalms in this module, I thought it would be helpful for us to have a conversation on common poetic features. In an attempt to understand the mind of the author better, scholars have analyzed the structure of biblical poetry and its cultural application. I'd like to focus on two of these structures here, parallelism and chiasmus or chiasm. So first let's look at parallelism. And it could be defined as pairing a line or part of a line with one or more lines that are in some way linguistically equivalent. So what I'd like you to do, I want to show you how this works. I want you to turn to Psalm chapter 27, verse 1, and we'll look at an example of this together. So I'll go ahead and read it out loud, and you just listen and you can look and read along with me and see if you can hear the parallelism. Ready? The Lord is my light and my help. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I dread? Do you hear the parallelism? The first line and the second line bear not only the same meanings, but they're also structured similarly in terms of grammar. Let me go ahead and read another example for you from Lamentations chapter 5, verse 19. But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures throughout the ages. These two lines are saying practically the same thing, but it's through this repetition and a different way of saying it that the author is able to clarify their meaning and move the poem forward. So those are examples of parallelism, and there's actually three kinds of parallelism, but we won't get into them in detail in this class. But a different structure of poetry is called chiasm. And it's a poetic element to be aware of. Chiasm is similar to parallelism in that it utilizes repetition, but it's different in that it does it in reverse order. In a formulaic sense, if parallelism can be seen as A followed by B, where A and B are equal, then chiasm can be seen as A and B followed by B and A, where the second set complements the first set. We read an example of parallelism, or we did just a moment ago, And let's hear an example now of chiasm from Song of Psalms, chapter 2, verse 14. Ready? You can look it up again if you want. Pause me here. You can look it up if you want, and you can see it as I read it here. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet, and your face is comely. Do you hear the pattern? Face and voice are repeated in reverse order. This is often done in biblical poetry to restate an expression to further fulfill its meaning or intended use. The article Reading Biblical Poetry in JSB uses this example on page 2188 if you'd like to see it laid out even more clearly. I think Adele Berlin summarizes the nature of biblical poetry well in that article. It's not easy to sum up what biblical poetry is. More than just a set of formal features or structures, poetry is sound and vision compressed for intensity and expressed with potency. Biblical poetry struggles to probe and stretch the important cultural concepts and issues of ancient Israel in exquisitely distilled Hebrew. In that sense, it is the purest, most rarefied expression of biblical thought.